first is surely the falsehood of equating time with money. Time. Money. Time. Money. Time does not equal money. It is much, much more valuable. For though time is infinite, our portion of it in this life is preciously short. Money, though it may seem compulsory, is in fact illusionary. Its function is to separate us from needed resources while burdening us with debt that we did not incur, compounded with interest and fractional banking, ensuring a lifetime of servitude, binding our time to the landlord and banker who hoard the wealth and all the good parcels of land, hostage our futures over imaginary cliffs. They close the factory doors, dividing us on lines of race and sex and class. So we're so busy fighting between ourselves over the scraps they brush from the table that we never confront the root of the problem. That's capitalism and its tool, money. Perhaps it's not inherently evil as the adage goes, but those who control it certainly do live backwards, and it's time we set things straight. It's not a question of how much one can have, consume, or own, but rather of what we do with our time, the ability to use our time productively that defines our quality of life. If we are born into debt, beholden to the banker, then our time is taken from us at birth, and with it, our freedom. Then, years later, when we are enslaved to some corporate master, maybe halfway through our lives, chained down and shackled, we open our eyes, asking ourselves how we lost control of our own destinies. How it got to be that only a handful of elite are allowed to decide what qualifies as work, in what we invest our resources, how the only paying jobs seem to revolve around war and military occupations, around maintaining the status quo. This is how ever so slowly we lose our souls. Time is the most valuable commodity we have. Let's make sure we use it wisely. To that end, it's high time to abolish the debt, every cent of it, and free ourselves. For surely no one else is going to do it for us.
A rumbling can be heard on the horizon, a great stirring underfoot, as dry, dying leaves crack and crumble from the weight bearing down on them. The march into battle echoes in far-off villages and mighty metropolis, as clear as a fallen pin. A wisp of wind in the Sahara is all that is needed to create a sandstorm in the dust bowl of the Midwest. Unrest in the streets and town squares, amassed in the raised voices at the checkout counter, and a fist can be seen in the air, multiplied by the millions of disheveled and downtrodden. No, we are not to blame for the bankers' plunder. We are merely the results of deregulation, of capitalization, of corruption in high places, and our voices will be heard, vibrating in your meeting halls, crumbling your capitals to dust and ash from whence they came. Greedy children and their teachers are not the guilty parties. The excess spoils will not be found in the pockets of the toiling masses. Grandma's social security check did not crash the economy any more than did immigrants send your jobs to China. We are not the problem, but like a thunderbolt from Zeus's fingertips, slicing through the darkness of their expedient lies, we will be the solution.
capitalism. The economic system in which all or most of the means of production and distribution, as land, factories, railroads, etc., are privately owned and operated for profit. Originally, under fully competitive conditions, it has been generally characterized by a tendency towards concentration of wealth, and in its later phase, by growth of great corporations, increased governmental control, etc. 2. The principles, methods, interests, power, influence, etc. of capitalists, especially those with large holdings. Like it or not, that is the definition of capitalism. There are no points to argue. You cannot argue with a dictionary. Dictionaries simply give a frame of reference to define what we are talking about, from which a conversation can begin with a common understanding. So now, let us examine the definition of capitalism to see whether or not it is a system designed for the greater good of all humanity, or if it is a means of exploitation of the many for the benefit of a few. To start, let us look at the first half of number 1 in the definition. The economic system in which all or most of the means of production and distribution, as land, factories, railroads, etc., are privately owned and operated for profit. Here we begin. All or most, privately owned, for profit. That leads me to question, how did all or most become privately owned in the first place? The definition mentions land, and that would be a logical starting point, for you cannot have factories or railroads without the land to first put them on. So how did the capitalists get control of the land? They stole it. Plain and simple, they stole it. They got on boats originating in Europe, came to America with advanced weaponry and soldiers, and just took the land by force from the native inhabitants through pillage and murder. Now, after seizing control of the land, the exploitation of the natural resources of the land must have been the next logical step in the process. For you cannot put up a factory or lay rails over a forest. That takes labor. Someone needs to do the physical work in order to convert the natural resources into products that can be sold in order to have the capital to build the factories. So in come the job creators, also known as slave owners. Natives from military-conquered territories became the cheap labor that the original capitalists used in order to acquire the wealth to support their enterprise. That, along with indentured servants who bought their passage to the land of the free, by giving up their freedom for a number of years, was the original workforce of America. The free labor that they produced made the capitalists extremely rich. Now we come to the advent of industrialization, the building of factories, etc., the original mills and mines and sweatshop assembly lines, in which the working class, the great plurality of impoverished workers, struggled and saved and scraped by in order to inch their way up the ladder over a period of generations. The backbone of the country, who built the great society of today with their own hands, while the owners, the capitalists, took in the lion's share of the profit from that labor, and then wrapped their heads around the idea that they built their economic empire all by themselves, that they were entitled to the good life, while half the workers were paid to kill the other half of the workers, J.P. Morgan, the ones who demanded fair wages and benefits. That, briefly, is the history of early capitalism. Yet, before moving on, we must also look at the next part of the definition, which states, originally under fully competitive conditions. Well, referring back to the indisputable history of capitalism, fully competitive would actually, in all reality, only include those who had the initial capital to invest into their enterprise. For the rest, for that startup capital, many turned to the banks for loans. These loans, made through fractional banking practices, the creation of capital out of thin air, and interest rates, ensured that the rich would continue to get richer. while opening up possibilities to a growing number of capitalists, which was only possible due to an expanding market, the expansion of colonization into the West and South, where more land and natural resources were waiting to be conquered. Remember, at this period of history, more capitalists were needed in order to capture the market. Capturing markets was only possible, in many cases, by war, occupation, and the overthrow of democratically elected governments, especially democratically elected communist governments. The investment in, and subsequently the profiteering from, war became an essential part of capitalism. It is also important to note when discussing the term fully competitive that this phrase is very misleading. For as most newly enterprising capitalists needed to borrow money from the banks in order to have the capital to invest, the banks had a great say in who actually received those loans and for what purpose that money would be used. This led to a great disparity in banking practices, advantaging certain communities while disadvantaging others. This practice, in the common tongue, is known as redlining. Former slaves and other minorities, including women, were rarely able to receive loans to start a business. If they did, the terms were often and systematically more harsh than the terms offered to white males of class and privilege. Those same banking practices are still used widely today. Racism is an inherent and vital part of maintaining the structure of capitalism and cannot be ignored in this discussion. For those who control the initial capital, control not only what types of products and manufacturing get invested in, but also who has the opportunity to succeed and grow within the system. Now, let us turn to the second half of the first part of the definition. It has been generally characterized by a tendency towards concentration of wealth. I believe we have already sufficiently covered this point with the agreement that under capitalism, the rich get richer. Yet, it is important to also point out that with the concentration of wealth, the stage we've been under for quite some time now, with shrinking, not expanding resources, conquerable lands, and markets, fewer and fewer capitalists are actually required to maintain the system, which means less, not more, opportunities in the future. Finally, for this section, let us look at, and in its later phase, by growth of great corporations, increased governmental control, etc. So wait, let us understand something here. There is a later phase of capitalism. Capitalism has a natural progression that cannot simply be halted, and what we have described so far to this point is merely the early phase, the good phase, the free market phase of capitalism. All that war and exploitation and discrimination that we talked about is the unregulated free market version of capitalism, of which all those pundits want the government to get out of the way. Somehow, supporters of capitalism believe that if the government were to just step aside, the capitalists would miraculously regulate themselves, would no longer seek to maximize their profits, would be good stewards of the environment and economy, and every man for himself would live in peace and tranquility. That finally we would all be free. Who are they trying to kid? No one capitalist is an island to themselves. They are only able to benefit so greatly from the system because society is structured in a way that allows the one to be propped up by the many. But wait, now they have technology. Now they have global trading. The capitalists don't need the many. They can get their cheap labor overseas. To hell with the common man. To hell with paying taxes for social services to support the society that they milk dry. That is why we have a government of the people, for the people, by the people. Because corporations are not people and need to be taxed and regulated so that the people, so that our entire society can manage and thrive. We are all codependent on each other for our own well-being and the well-being of all. Now, let us look at the second part of the definition. Capitalism is 2. The principles, methods, interest, power, influence, etc. of capitalists, especially those with large holdings. Principles, by definition, means the ultimate source, fundamental truth, law, doctrine, and motivating force. For capitalism, the stated and widely accepted driving principle is the profit motive. In other words, money. The single most important goal for capitalists is attaining personal, private wealth, and with it, power, for themselves. That's it. By the definition of the word, the underlying principle of capitalism is greed. Methods. Let us recap the methods of capitalism so that we don't forget. They are war, murder, slavery, exploitation, theft, and deception. Some may argue that hard work and dedication are also methods of attaining profit. However, those are in reality only minor contributing factors. For great wealth under capitalism derives primarily from being able to take as much as you can get by any means necessary. Interest. This again has already been clearly defined as profit. However, the ability to control the profit and the resources from which that profit is derived is by far the greatest of interest for the capitalist. For from that arrives the power in which to influence and control others, especially the politicians within the government, who under the influence of the capitalists, instead of regulating them, clear the path for them to climb through the ranks and over the dead bodies left in the wake of capitalism, where they then arrive logically at the final position of world domination. So when we speak of capitalism, that is what we are speaking of.
Who says it has to be like this? Tax the rich. With the debt ceiling falling in, tax the rich. And a national economy bottoming out, tax the rich. While the working class tightens its belt, tax the rich. The yachting class is getting fat, tax the rich. On subsidies for billionaires, tax the rich. And oil companies, tax the rich. Insurance companies rake it in, tax the rich. While healthcare ceases to exist, tax the rich. And education is being gutted, tax the rich. While unions and immigrants are being blamed, tax the rich. So that we can bail out the bankers, tax the rich. With corporate welfare, tax the rich. And global warfare, tax the rich. Capitalization doesn't work, tax the rich. For 99% of this planet, tax the rich. The system is imploding, tax the rich. And the bombs, they keep exploding, tax the rich. Tearing up our lives, tax the rich. With the bloodthirsty shrapnel of their greed, tax the rich. The measure of austerity is a grave, tax the rich. No longer shall we be your slaves, tax the rich. You can hear the drums beating, tax the rich. It's on everybody's lips, tax the rich. And it's getting louder, tax the rich. All together now, tax the rich. And step forward into that brighter day.
Disparity is all around us, pocketed by great bunkers of wealth. Fortified swimming pools and Rolls Royces share the same intersections as shopping cart homeless. Invisible to all, poverty is everywhere. The common theme we see from California to New York, from Benton Harbor to New Orleans, is that in every single community in this country, there is an all-out war on the poor and dispossessed. With a mishmash of local quality of life ordinances, targeting and criminalizing the weakest among us. Any sign of community or compassion is jeered at and attacked relentlessly by vigilante neighborhood watch groups. The wealthiest and well-connected do not want to have to see poverty, do not want to have to be directly confronted with the byproducts of the system that made them rich, the system that supports their every need and desire, as only money can, for the few. They do not want to feel guilty, so they get angry and look for someone to blame. Unable to find a mirror, they instead turn their fury to the very victims of the system, convincing themselves that the poor are there because they are lazy and don't want to work. That, however, would better describe those trust fund socialites than the family of four trying to scrape by in a system that has trained them to be dependent on factories and corporations, dependent on the next paycheck, which then, overnight, took all the jobs away, casting aside countless middle-aged workers who are then left unprepared for survival in a jobless economy. Those who somehow think that merely working hard is the solution have forgotten the founding principles that govern the economic system known as capitalism. For every boom in one corner of the world, a bust is required in another. The very cornerstone of the profit motive is founded on the exploitation of others, of disposable workforces and communities that are used up for their resources and labor, which are then quickly discarded as soon as a cheaper means of production, through both the use of robotics and the exploitation of local manufacturing to unregulated markets abroad, presents itself. Poverty is a necessary and inevitable pillar of capitalism. For the greater the poverty, the more widespread the destitution and destruction, the more wealth that is accumulated and hoarded by those at the very top. At this very moment, while America reels from one financial crisis after another, with tens of millions of families living in abject poverty, the richest 1% are sitting on a combined wealth of $4 trillion, which lies stagnant outside of the economy in private coffers and offshore accounts. Any attempt to tax or redistribute this wealth for necessary social programs is immediately scoffed at by the politicians, who are indentured to the corporate lobbyists and campaign contributions in order to maintain their own positions of privilege and power. The ability to concentrate wealth enables the capitalists to also concentrate power, leaving all those without out. Without poverty and the massive debt it ensnares, capitalism would not be able to function. Therefore, when we speak of overturning the system of capitalism, we are going directly after the root causes of the poverty that we see in our everyday lives.
When you have to terrify your own people into giving their freedom away, we say it's guaranteeing security. When you invade another country to steal their wealth and establish your own regime, we call it setting people free. When you bomb a tiny village while all its people are fast asleep, that is known as collateral damage. And when you rob from the poor to subsidize your rich friends' wallets, well, I'd say that's graft, but maybe you'd call it paying homage. When there are police at every corner, no, that's not repression, it's maintaining order. When all the news tells you to follow the government line, they say that freedom of the press is doing just fine. When you're not capable of an independent thought, then you've received a good education. And when your health care runs out, that's just the benefits of privatization. When we hide our sweatshops in China, we say that slavery is abolished. And when your vote isn't even being counted, there are those who would call that universal suffrage. When a baby is shot by a stray bullet, maybe it's officially an accident. But just try telling that to the mother. And when the ice caps are melted and the air is polluted, no, that has not a thing to do with your profits. When you say we're at war, I ask you, when haven't we been? That's just their version of peace without end. Why is it that the rules suddenly change when you're on the wrong side of a color? And while you're at it, can you explain to me how life in prison without a trial could ever be for their own protection? When you get to choose who has the right to live, is that what's meant by having God on your side? And when the judges are allowed to hand out all the jobs, is that thanks to having free and open elections? I don't know what you think about all this that's going on, but if that's democracy, then something's very, very wrong.
Ever wonder where all the money went? How is it that after all that hard work we put into building this country, after the generations of labor to build up our infrastructure, all the schools and hospitals, the libraries, highways, factories, and housing that we assembled by hand, that this country could be broke? All the physical resources are right there before us. This is the utopia that capitalism promised. A world of plenty where all the material needs were there for our taking. Building this was part of the public charter, to provide for the future. Yet now, after amassing all of this abundance, we cannot even afford to live in the country our grandparents built. Where did all the wealth go? Everybody seems to be looking around the room, chasing their tails for the answers, pointing and blaming in every direction, except for the obvious gorilla sitting in front of our faces. It's war. Though it literally costs in materials only $10,000 to build a house, it cost us nearly $10 million to destroy one on the other side of the planet. Multiply that by 60 years of overbloated Defense Department budgets, and you start to see the problem. We've warred ourselves into poverty. Oh, 9/11, 9/11! Here comes the chorus on cue to shut down any criticism. Yet, it was on 9/10 that Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Pentagon lost $2 trillion. That's $2 trillion left unaccounted for that will not be going to pay down our debt. This is money taken out of our education, healthcare, and other needed services. And just like that, the next day, it's all forgotten. Since then, the war budget has more than doubled, with us paying corporate contractors who receive no bid, cost-plus contracts on every last bolt and service, bleeding the taxpayers dry. At $1 million a minute, a decades-long war has emaciated America to the point where we've tightened the belt to the buckle and we're still no better off for it. With the sun staring down on us, with all that free energy, what are we doing fighting with anyone over oil? The fear that is used to manipulate this world into a permanent state of war exists for one sole reason, and it can be summed up in a single word: profits. The sale of arms and arsenals is extremely profitable for those involved. At every stage, from the invasions, ransacking and looting of lives and national resources, to the rebuilding efforts to replace what is destroyed in the wake, the systematic abuses of a capitalist economy ensure that a handful of elites become filthy rich, while the rest of us perish. That is what war is all about. Currently, in every single congressional district in this country, there is something being manufactured to support the war effort. By design, just enough jobs are created to promote war, that regardless of political affiliation, no member of Congress has the courage to stand up to their constituents and say this is wrong and immoral and needs to be ended. When the number of jobs we could create using the budget of a single Pentagon contract for the good of our society is compared to the weaponry they produce to kill, we are left staggering from hypocrisy. If by investing even a tenth of the budget for war into projects for peace, there would not even be a need for a military. If the militarization of our nation and the making of war have become the only sources of employment and development the economic system of capitalism can come up with, at the expense of the well-being and future of our entire population, then undeniably we are on the wrong path. The war economy has bankrupted America financially, morally, and spiritually. At the start of this latest round of madness in 2001, the talking point for going to war was that we would not allow anyone to destroy our greatness, that we would fight to protect our way of life. Yet, here we stand 13 years later, with our country gutted and crumbling from within, with more resources than ever being spent on fighting the shadows of our own paranoia. The real enemy of the people, the only enemy there is war itself. To defeat war, we must defund it. That means taking back control of our economy, taking the money away from war and instead investing back into our communities and infrastructure, into our children's futures, while we still have something to leave them.
First, they take the seed, the fetus of our food chain, and modify it genetically, splicing it with poisons and all things that should never be, like scorpion genes and all things unholy. They change the nucleus, the very center of life, to be resistant to the most toxic pollutants they can round up. Yet contrary to their advertisement, resistance is not immune. Mutations begin to bloom, and laboratory human rats limp with tumors to their tombs, while judges and lawmakers sanction all this gloom upon us, forcing farmers to plant these deadly crops that have untold consequences to our DNA. GMO. And so too must we go the way of the honeybee. Taking down trade barriers while erecting walls between human beings and their humanity. I want to talk about illegal immigration. Open up the history books to Columbus and Cortez, to John Smith, the doctrine of discovery, as if Native Americans do not know of their own existence. Stealing as they go, destroying any trace of our native culture. Bulldozer in tow, they reap what we sow, crushing us below the booted heel of their occupation. Modifying our lives when they killed the buffalo and perverted Mother Earth for their greedy purpose. Now they export their killer corn across all borders, while impoverishing local farmers in entire countries. The poor deny their human right to travel freely, deny their right to self-determination. Who gave Monsanto the right to immigrate into my body, to patent my blood cells, to change my genetic structure? Is that what you call free trade? G-M-O-W-T-O-G-I Joe O-M-G. As if the theft were not enough, the abuse of modern technology to gain the ill-begotten, to steal the land, the water, the air, to destroy our food supply. Here comes something to really make your skin peel, brought to you direct from the makers of napalm. The private army, Z, Blackwater, paramilitary, CIA-trained mercenaries and their puppet governments to do the bidding of the highest bidder, to hold a gun to your head while they force-feed you genetically altered tofu and mutant fish. All approved by the CEO FDA. It's all connected, from bullets to butter. Did you know that someone makes a buck off it every time a drone strikes? I want that person arrested! And oh my God, I'm here to contest this assumption of privilege and the corporate person of some company having more rights than me. Of playing God with our lives and ecology, of pushing humanity to the very brink of extinction. Their money is a fiction to keep us enslaved, to keep us in chains. It's high time we break them.
Democracy is broken, and capitalism doesn't work. Fact. Plain and simple fact. Capitalism thrives on disaster. It's a system of profiteering that pits man against man. For one to succeed, another must fail. Or more precisely, millions of others must fail. For the more that suffer, the greater the wealth accumulated by the one. The many support the weight of the one with a booted heel in the face. Democracy, by definition, is government by the people, for the people. When looked at closely, it resembles communism and socialism in many ways. The underlying principle of all these forms is that the people, all the people, get an equal share, whether that be in bread or dollars. Governments, all governments, especially democracies, are entrusted to provide for the well-being of all, not just the few. The infusion of capitalism into our society has destroyed the very fabric of our democracy. The two are incompatible and need with urgency, like a cancer, to be separated. Words often attributed incorrectly to Abraham Lincoln, yet still spoken over 100 years ago, foretell. I see in the future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. What this foresaw was the America of today, where the corporations control and decide the direction and fate of the entire world for the benefit of a handful of businessmen who know nothing about sociology or ecology, never mind ethics, who see global warming, the melting of the ice caps, as the new frontier, the next business venture, their opportunity to turn a buck, while the rest of us are ground up and spit out by the machine. It is on our backs and with our blood that they propel themselves to the status of kings and gods. That is the sad reality of the situation. That is why we have no health care. That is why our homes are being stolen from us. That is why we have food riots around the world and no jobs at home. But to do all this, they need a tool, and that tool is war. War is the excuse and the means that enable the richest of the rich to hoard the entire wealth of the planet while billions suffer and die. It's a crime against humanity what has been done. If ever in the history of mankind there was a need and justification for revolution, that time is now. Corruption has run rampant for too long, unchecked and unbalanced, and it's high time that it be driven out from the chambers and their ministries, from the boardrooms and penthouses, out and for good. It's time for the people to take back their country, to take responsibility for it, to help lift each other up and turn this world around. The problem we now face is one of evolution. We must look the facts squarely in the face and decide how and where we are going to advance from here. For we cannot go backwards. Capitalism is in the midst of collapse and implosion. And in its collapse, the owners of the capital, the Rockefellers and all, are taking the rest of the world down with them. Point in fact, the World Bank and IMF, run by the very same band of stockholders, admits that it is the fault of the policies that they set in place that has exacerbated and in many cases created the famine and poverty that we see today. Not only in third world countries, but in places like India, where local agriculture was destroyed to make way for American food conglomerates and profiteers like Monsanto, throwing a self-sustaining subcontinent onto the brink of starvation. And now they're going after Greece with Portugal, Italy, and Spain next on the chopping block. NAFTA is another such policy that is crippling the entire North American continent with unemployment while stripping farmers in Mexico of their lands to make way for imports. Instead of reversing course, as must be done in order to save our faltering economy and infrastructure, the powers that be are pushing for even greater deregulation of international trade with proposals for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership, which will free companies from all trade barriers, giving these global corporations the same rights as countries before the United Nations, empowering businesses to sue nations in international court for loss of revenue due to any restrictions whatsoever. This is the path we are on. The system must change. That is evident. However, bringing us back to fact, the capitalists control the military, the police, and all private mercenary security firms and are not about to let go of their power. The bottom line is that the only way to overturn capitalism is by taking away their toy. Their primary tool, their weapon of control, is the money. We must release ourselves from their debt and abolish the private banking system. The resources we need today are all right here. We have so much work that needs to be done. All the tools are at our disposal, and an unemployed workforce starves to death. Seriously, what's wrong with us? A few very rich bankers and corporate executives hoard all the money and say we cannot have what is right in front of our noses and squeeze us until we have nothing left. They poison our air and food and water, and right when we have nothing left, they criminalize our poverty. No matter how much the bankers say we owe, they cannot stop the sun from rising the next day. The moment we reject their monetary system, we win. The government may say there is no money, but that does not deny the fact that the very resources that we need to improve our lives exist in plenty. Resources abound. It's just a matter of making proper use of them. You want a solution to the economic crisis? It's simple and can be done in one day. It's called total debt forgiveness. You just push the reset button to zero, wipe out all debt in one fell swoop. Global Economic Amnesty. I don't owe you, you don't owe me, and no one owes anyone a thing. Your house, your apartment, wherever you live, it's yours. And if you don't have a place to live, then you move into whatever house is boarded up, and there's a lot of them around. And that's that. Zero homelessness in one day. How do we do that? Where is the legal basis? The answer can be found right in the United States Constitution. Without even going to Congress, the President may use the power of pardon to forgive our entire debt with one stroke of the pen. Eminent domain was established for this very purpose, to protect the people from the bankers. Screw the banks. Why not? They've done everything they can to screw us, so screw them. Screw the banks and screw the bankers to hell. It's that easy. Then we can look seriously at what physical resources we have and start repairing our communities, our country, and our planet. Not in 2020, not in 2050, but right now, today. Take away their money and you take away their power. Total debt forgiveness. Global economic amnesty. Now.
Tropical depression, an improbable left turn, dangerous transformation, waters warmer than normal, growing effects of the global, the worst of nature combined as one, red flag warnings, high altitude jet stream, surging waves, skeptics aware too late. Low-lying lands give way to the funneled mass of nature, concentrated unto the weakest points. Screams for help as they pull the plug, submerging the city into darkness. Explosions and sweeping fires light the sky in red and orange. Ships thrown ashore, homes tumbled over, and the poor, as always, swept away and forgotten. She was born innocent enough, 18th down the list. Cassandra, also known as Hurricane Sandy. Tropical depression, an improbable left turn, dangerous transformation, waters warmer than normal, growing effects of the global, the worst of nature combined as one, red flag warnings, high altitude jet stream, surging waves, skeptics aware too late. Low-lying lands give way to the funneled mass of nature, concentrated unto the weakest points. Screams for help as they pull the plug, submerging the city into darkness. Explosions and sweeping fires light the sky in red and orange. Ships thrown ashore, homes tumbled over, and the poor, as always, swept away and forgotten. She was born innocent enough, 18th down the list. And the poor, as always, swept away and forgotten.
righteously, there is outrage over the state of our environment. Whether it be mountaintop removal for coal in West Virginia or the dumping of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, we all suffer from the consequences. The man-made disasters are already too numerous to count and affect the health of us all, as well as the stability of the entire planet. When we look at our economy, how well-paying manufacturing jobs reliant on human labor have been replaced by robotic assembly lines, prison labor, and overseas sweatshops, the rage boils within us as we face eviction and are unable to feed our families. It's the poor who suffer, who always suffer at the hands of the capitalist class. And it is through their eyes that this story will be told. For when we look upon the ivory and glass towers stretching to the sky, while we live in poverty and despair, we see the economic injustice that is placed upon us and look for someone to blame. Rightfully, our gaze falls upon those at the very top, for we know it is they who have gutted this planet for their own benefit. It is they who are to be held accountable. Yet, to solve the crisis that is now upon us, it is we who are responsible. For truth be told, it was through our human labor and our complacency that all this came about. Yes, we were paid to produce the consequences that we are now paying for. If we are to approach the problem with the aim of finding a solution, then we must look scientifically at how we got here in order to find our pathway out. We built the society we have by hand. We built it through our human labor. Somebody else gave us the job, but we did the work. If we as a people built the problem, are we not also able to build the solution? Global warming is the major challenge for this generation. If that challenge is not met successfully, we as a species may not live to see another generation. Our jobs are gone. They're not coming back. The corporate masters have found a cheaper workforce. They do not need us. All they're keeping us around for is to find out how much they can take. We are on our own to fix this. The sooner we realize this fact and get to work, the better. We have an unemployed workforce slowly starving to death. Officially, 46.2 million people are living in poverty in the United States. Officially, 6 million people are living homeless. Millions upon millions of people are ready to work. If only they had something to believe in. Never before in history have two problems been so intertwined, so that a single solution could cure them both. The problem began with industrialization. That is where we crossed the line with nature, and it has only gotten worse since then. The tools and technology are available to solve both our ecological and economic problems. As caretakers of this planet, with a responsibility to our future generations, we have an obligation to produce using clean, sustainable methods that do not pollute our planet. It's time to restore our roots of local production and agriculture. It's time also to work with purpose as communities, as the owners of what we produce. After all this time, after all these centuries, after our grandparents and ancestors did all the work, for us to own nothing of it, while those who sat on their asses live in splendor, is nothing short of scandalous. The only logical conclusion is that we go back to work for ourselves and do this collectively. By combining our resources and networking with others of the same mind, we are able today to create the foundation of a sustainable future for us all. By working together collectively, by owning our production, we actually have a say in what we produce and how we produce it, into what we invest our time.
Through that, we become individually responsible for the direction of our labor, at which point, as a collective workforce, we have the power to change the world for the better.
All right, so gave you quite a lot to digest tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit more, but it's like there's a lot up there, and I bet the big question is, well, what are we going to do about it? Huh? So let's get real and show what we are doing about it. All right. This is actually a report from a group that I work with called National People's Action, and this is a national group of about 40 to 50 local groups that work together, representing, probably around 10,000 plus people around the country, tens of thousands. And we're working together to create a long-term agenda to change our society, to change our entire economic structure. And this is called our long-term agenda for a new economy. Now, this all starts with a story, all right? The question is, how did we get here? Well, back in the 1960s, the United States experienced one of the largest periods of economic expansion in history. It was a decade marked by powerful social movements, whose victories led to increased intolerance of social inequity, while expansion of the workforce and the strength of labor unions led to a vast growth of the middle class. This growing prosperity threatened the rich and corporations. They were scared, and they decided to act. Right, so back in 1971, corporate lawyer and future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell Jr. wrote a memo to his friend Eugene Seymour, the director of U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The Powell memo was a warning to corporations that they must take the fight for power as seriously as the drive for profits. Now, this is the Powell memo here, and it says, "No thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack." Basically, he's talking about capitalism. Capitalism is under attack by society. Back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, when labor was strong, they were starting to lose, and they saw this, so they decided to do something about it. Now, what they did was 1% of corporations developed a long-term agenda to take power, resulting in the 1% economy that we have today, which works for the 1% in their corporations, but not for the rest of us. So, to do that, the 1% had to make the rest of us believe it was for the good of everyone. So how do they do that? One, they told us that racism is in the past, that we are in a post-racial society. Now, if you remember from the earlier video, capitalism and racism basically intertwined. Capitalism can't really function properly without racism, because basically what racism does is it sets one group of poor people above another group of poor people, and then you're fighting for the scraps instead of looking at who's doing the actual damage to all of us. So they want us to think that racism is over. If we have a black president, then we must be past racism. Well, we're not, as a lot of the recent presses attest to, I think you can see. Number two, they sold us on a rugged individualism. Everyone has the opportunity to exceed, but some don't take it. Three, they told us that the free market fixes everything. When corporations profit, we all profit. Four, they said that unions are bad for workers and for companies. Of course, that was their competition. If labor is strong, then the average worker has a say. They didn't like that, so they had to undermine our unions. And five, they told us that the U.S. government is wasteful and, in effect, inefficient. Look to private sectors for answers. Now, to do this, it didn't happen overnight. What they had to do was identify pathways to the 1% economy that would take power away from us and give it to them. So what they identified was different routes of attack, and they used all of these, from politics, deregulation, privatization, and direct attacks on us. And then what they did was they followed each pathway, making changes large and small to rules and laws to create structural transformation for their benefit. Right, they changed rules. They won reforms by privatizing smaller services. They built on those other changes to win major reforms. All right, so that's how they got us to where we are today. All right, to win these reforms, they had to create an infrastructure that advanced their ideas. All right, this is the conservative infrastructure. Maybe you notice some of the names up there. Now, they all have kind of a loose or tight affiliation. They kind of work together. Each group basically fulfills their own mission. They're just doing what they do naturally, but now they're doing kind of like on the same page. So they've got an infrastructure that has policy and ideology, business groups, money, media, single and multiple issue organizations, and they kind of work together to advance their overall agenda for all of them. All right? So given where we are today, there are three pathways that we can take. One is that we can fight to keep what we have. This means drawing the line in the sand to save our jobs and homes and trying to protect the best social programs and policies we have. While we must defend our communities, defense alone is a path towards defeat. If we really want to win, we have to go on the offensive. So this really doesn't work. We can't just be on the defense, or else we're going to lose at the end of the day. So the second choice we have is we can work to get back to the old economy. Now there's a problem with that also. We can fight to return to where things were before the financial crisis. While for many of us, these periods were more hopeful than where we are now, profound racial and gender disparities and environmental destruction meant that they weren't sustainable, and therefore they weren't working for all of us. Welcome. Or number three, this is our third path that we can take. We can reimagine what's possible, and that's the path that we're taking. We refuse to let our present challenges present us from fully rethinking how our democracy and economy work. If we lower our expectations of what's possible, then we've already lost. But if we craft a vision for an America in which the health and well-being of all families, that's everyone, of all families, all communities, our entire planet are prioritized in our national bottom line, then we can inspire millions of people to join us. And that's the work that we're doing right now. We're getting the word out there, getting people involved, and find out the possibilities that they have to create their own future. All right. What we've done in our group, and NPA for those who came in late, that's National People's Action. That's one of the groups that I'm working with, and this is our 40-year plan to building a new economy. Now, what we did last year was we engaged over 500 of our leaders. And a leader is someone who's, your leaders. If you're doing something in your community, if you're taking action, if you're stepping forward, you're a leader. We engaged with over 500 leaders around the country throughout our network and came up with a plan. And it was a strategic inquiry process that set our sights on the long-term victory, to look deeply at the problems we face. We identified the principles of a new economy that puts people first and the pathways that will take us there. So this is what it looks like, where we have community control over our government, democratic control over our government. That means it's like elections are no longer bought, that we actually have a say, and our say means something. Public control of the economy, structural equity, and global sustainability. That's what our people's economy looks like. All right? We have democratic control of the capital, racial justice, corporations for the good, for the common good, for us, where they used to be. Before corporations became people, which they aren't, but under the law, they were actually set out with a program to do something for the public good, and then they dissolved after they fulfilled that mission. Well, that's something that needs to come back. Ecological stability, and real democracy. And again, real democracy is that, our voice actually counts. That, for the majority right now, we have very little say in our government. And we want to change that where our say actually matters. Alright? This agenda is kind of like a compass. Alright? If you're at sea, it's on a straight line. You have to constantly adjust your path. And that's what a compass does. It allows you the flexibility to deal with what's happening in the moment, but you're staying on that same direction of where you want to go. You keep that vision in mind. Alright. To do this, we need to win structural reforms that transfer power from the 1% and corporations back to the people and the public. We need to win structural reforms that build our power and take on bigger fights. And then we need to change the dominant narrative, win the battle of big ideas, and advance our own ideas to build our power. And to do this, we need to expose the big lie that corporate greed is good for everyone, and tell a new story based on our values. The idea that the economy should work for all of us. Now this is our internal network here. We're building our own progressive infrastructure. This is our group, National People's Action. And these are all the affiliates that are part of our group. This is our local network, our national network. Okay? Now this represents plus or minus 10,000 members throughout the entire organization. But this is only part of our infrastructure. Because our infrastructure is this, and this, and this. You see that? That's, you see how big our infrastructure is compared to the 1%'s infrastructure. They have a lot of groups working, but nothing like this. We have so many more people involved in what's going on. And this represents hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, through this infrastructure. And we have people working on economic justice, labor movement, organizing networks, racial justice networks, environment, think tanks, strategy, media, across the board. We've got people working on this. But the difference of working in an affinity group and just working by yourself and working with a coalition where we're not taking orders from anyone, but we're working on the same page. We recognize the relationship so that we can say, yes, we're all working towards this final goal together. And we work in our local groups, in our local communities, to make that agenda possible step by step. So what's our next move? Well, what we got to do is we've got to reorient. All right, we're moving away from strategic inquiry into strategic practice. We're reorienting our campaigns, our network, and our alliances from the short-term win towards long-term victory. That's our 40-year plan towards building a new economy. I'm going to open it up for questions. If someone wants to hit those house lights on the side there. If anyone has any questions about this, I know it's a lot to take in, so I've left some time for some Q&A here. If anyone has any questions about everything we've covered so far. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, what's the difference between imperialism and capitalism?
Between what?
Imperialism.
Imperialism and capitalism. Well, think of an empire that controls everything. That's kind of like the Roman Empire, Napoleon's empire, the American empire. That's the muscle. That's the machine. But what's running the machine is that economic system underneath the empire. The system of capitalism holds the whole thing together. Without capitalism, without the profit motive, which is the underlying root of capitalism, you can't really have that empire, because then all of a sudden you're not working for the one, you're working for the many. And so when you take capitalism out, you actually are also undermining that imperialism. But the imperialism is kind of like just the fiscal extension of capitalism. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
So, how did you pick 40 years as a time number?
Well, we have to look at what we are capable of doing within the time span of our lives, how much time we have, okay, and also where we got. If you looked at the Powell memo back in '71, that was about a 40-year period of where we went from an economy that was starting to work for a good number of us. You know, that's when labor unions were strong. That was when we had our highest prosperity in the country, was in the 60s and 70s. Not that it was perfect, but that's where economically the country was at its high point. And unions were strong. We were building middle class. The different social and civil rights movements were building. People were feeling their power. And that's 40 years ago is when the capitalist class decided that they needed to change things to make a playing field that was better for them. And so it took us 40 years to get here. And we understand that it's not going to, our changes aren't going to happen overnight. This is a long-term plan. And through this we have short, medium, and long-term goals. And the great thing about this is that we have that vision, but we're always flexible of what's happening in the moment. So we can adapt and respond to what's happening today. Anyone else? Lyle?
How many states are participating so far
in
the group?
In National People's Action?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. We probably have about a dozen to 20-ish states, local groups involved, and we're constantly adding new groups. We actually just we're on dates. Basically, call them we're on dates. We're going steady with 3 new groups right now. We're kind of like in a tryout period with some new groups. And actually, at our convention in DC this year, we just joined up with the National Day Laborers Organization, which they basically doubled our numbers at our convention. We brought in 1,000 people. They brought in 1,000 people, which was really nice because we're really building our alliances with this plan of like building our networks. We're actually seriously looking at recognizing those relationships. So say, yes, we are working with this group and we are working with that group so that we know that we're not on our own here. We know that we're working with a larger movement, but it's not more coordinated. No one's really calling the shots, but we're coming more to a consensus, you know, that Occupy consensus of, 80, 90%. That's about where we're working. Is like, before we came up with our plan, we went and talked to our affiliates around the country, to individuals, to find out what a people's economy would look like to them. And then we took all those white sheets and put them all together and compiled everything and said, well, this is what people are telling us. The difference between, being a leader from the front and letting the community lead is that we don't go in telling anyone what they're going to do. We come in asking what our communities need, what our communities think we should do. And then we take those notes and say, oh, that's what the community needs. And what we find is, after meeting with so many groups, that there's so much overlap with a group in Cincinnati, with a group in Los Angeles, with a group in Benton Harbor, with Miami, we've got groups all over saying the same thing. So when we come to that kind of consensus, we understand that we're on the right track of what we're looking to build.
Are you also making any kind of international contacts, setting up for growth, and getting information from other international groups that can help out?
That's a very interesting question. Actually, on the artist side, on the poetry side, we are actually doing that. I don't know so much about, there are loose, very, very loose affiliations on the international level. A lot of the people that were organizing the outreach and media outreach for the start of Occupy Wall Street were also involved with the Arab Spring and all this. So there are people who are involved on an international level, but where I find that it's actually the most, most interesting thing that's happening is with the poets, actually. Is that right now, personally, I'm involved with 2 international poetry groups that are working specifically on social, economic, and racial justice. We've got the Revolutionary Poets Brigade, which I'm sure many of you people have heard from my lips about, and also the World Poetry Movement. They're similar but different. The Revolutionary Poets Brigade is chapters around the world of individual poets. The World Poetry Movement, it has a coordinating committee made up of all of the major poetry festival directors around the world working on the same issues. So between the two groups, we have a wide reach across the planet. And poetry is something that it's the art, it's the creativity that's linking all these issues together. My personal 2-year goal for the next few years is to actually link our organizing networks, which you saw up here, right here, a big network here. The one thing that was interesting that I brought up to our director, our executive director, after they presented this to us, was that they didn't have the cultural groups in that network. And I said, well, wait a minute, you're missing a big network there because our activist networks are huge. But guess what? Our poet networks are even bigger. And so when you combine the two, now all of a sudden you basically triple your numbers overnight. So my 2-year plan is actually to connect our organizing networks with our cultural networks to bring the artists and the activists together. So
More of the arts.
More on the arts. And art is so important to the movements that we had. It brings it back into the gut and soul of what's going on. It's everyone who's painting a sign out there, they're using their artistic ability to spread the word of what they believe in.
Yeah, I think so. Those are the batteries that charge everyone up.
Yeah.
You need the arts.
Exactly. Anyone else? I've got one here. If anyone else wants some, let me know. Any other questions? Okay, then we're going to close with a final poem. Like I said, we're going to have a book signing in the bookstore after this. Quasi, thank you for coming out here. Wonderful to see you here.
Forgive us for being late, but we had another commitment a little earlier with some friends who I actually would like you to get together with.
Okay.
Because they're also dealing with culture and its intersection with politics.
Nice.
But I just wanted to say also, Mark, that I really appreciate the tremendous amount of work that you have done to try to bring culture and politics together. That is so important. And I really appreciate the way that you're combining the cultural, political, and economic together in a way that I would really like to see more people, both some of those who've been active with Occupy and those who've been active with other movements, do a lot more of. So I just really want to appreciate you and all that you've been doing and that of people who you've been working with as well. So you definitely wanted to come tonight. And please forgive us for being a little late, but
Well,
really appreciate it.
the respect is absolutely mutual. For those who don't know, Quasi is the president of the Greater Echo Park. What is it?
Greater Echo Park Release in Neighborhood Council.
Yes. So Quasi's putting his money where his mouth is and stepping up and putting both feet in the fight. So I take my hat off to you. So thank you. Also a couple other thank yous. I'd like to thank Tico's son for being here tonight. For the videos that we played earlier, Nelson and Tico's son have created all this music for the video montages that I put together, and they came out to support the work with music over the poetry and all this, and it's been fantastic. I love the music these guys are doing, so please check them out. It's Tico's son. And do you have a website?
Yeah, you can just find us at facebook.com/Tikalsun, TIKALSUN.
Thank you to Jim for doing our tech tonight. And that was very difficult to get this all with all the videos and lights and stuff. So thank you very much, Jim, for your patience with that. and also to Bjorn for hosting us tonight. Like I said, we're going to close out with one poem, so whenever you're ready, take it away. Ballad for the 99%. In the beginning, capitalism was good. There was plenty for all. Soon, however, a head was reared, and a child. The population grew, and more had to be produced. And we controlled the shipping lanes. Great profits were on the horizon, yet they kept reaching fewer and fewer hands. Soon the working masses demanded compensation, things like decent pay and living conditions, and limits to their working hours, and equality for all. And then the waves began crashing on some poor old native shores, and lest we be forgetting what got us into this mess to begin with. Plain and simple greed. Now those be the ones up there on them hills, burning the skies at night, robbing you blind at the supermarket. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Now we be hearing about all this pollution business, on making profits from cleaning up the mess they made in the first place. And Prince Willie and Kate may be all a fad, but they will never have to face foreclosure. Theirs will be the last to taste of salmon. While on western shores radiation pours in from a new Hiroshima. How did you sleep last night, secure in your bunker? And you, Mr. Rockefeller, up there in your penthouse suite, overlooking the neon of your own tragedy. It is you who will be eaten by the cockroaches, while we scramble for the crumbs left off of the dying planet. Yes, the meat shall certainly inherit the earth, at least what's left of it. So before it's too late, rise up, my brothers, rise up, my sisters. Take hold of your futures. Shape your destiny with the courage that is in you. Now is not the time to remain silent. Now is the time to take to the streets. Now is the time for the 99% to be heard. This is the day we've been waiting for.
Ever wonder where all the money went?